You've probably seen them gliding across a lake like they own the place. And here's the thing, they actually do. Not metaphorically. Not poetically. Literally. Swans have been documented driving ducks, geese, herons, and even other swan families off stretches of water they've claimed as theirs, and they do it with a level of organized, calculated aggression that most people never associate with a bird that ends up on greeting cards. So today we are going to pull back that white feathery curtain and look at what's actually happening inside a swan family's territorial operation, because once you understand the psychology behind it, you'll never look at a peaceful lake the same way again. Let's start with something that almost nobody talks about. A swan doesn't just occupy a lake. It maps it. Studies conducted on mute swans in England, the most common species in Europe and the one most people picture when they think of swans, showed that established pairs develop extremely detailed internal maps of their water body. They know which bank gets more bread from tourists. They know where the underwater vegetation is thickest. They know where the current slows down and fish become easier to catch in shallow water. And they use that knowledge actively, positioning themselves and their cygnets in the highest value zones while systematically blocking competitor access to those zones. That's not instinct in the simple sense. That's spatial reasoning applied to resource control. That's strategy. Now here's where it gets psychologically fascinating. Swans operate on what behavioral ecologists call a resident advantage principle. What that means in plain terms is this: the animal that has lived on a territory longer will win almost every confrontation, not because it's physically stronger, but because it fights harder. It has more to lose. A swan that has spent 2 years building a nest, learning a water body, and raising young on a particular lake will escalate a conflict to a degree that an intruder simply won't match. And intruders know this. They read body language, water posture, neck position, and they make a calculation. Is this worth it? Usually the answer is no. The resident wins without a single physical blow because the psychological dominance has already been established. Think about that for a moment. The swan is running a protection racket on vibes alone. But when it does become physical, and it does, the commitment level is extraordinary. Male swans, called cobs, have been documented breaking the wings of dogs that entered nesting territory. There's a well-known case in the UK where a cob in Stratford-upon-Avon became so aggressive toward rowers that wildlife authorities had to issue public warnings. In Chicago's Busser Lake, a mute swan named Frank became locally famous, or infamous, for capsizing kayaks and attacking swimmers who came within 100 meters of his nesting site. Animal Control received over 40 complaints about Frank over 3 breeding seasons. He was eventually relocated. And you know what happened? He was relocated to a different lake, immediately reasserted territorial control there, and began the exact same behavioral pattern within weeks. The strategy wasn't a reaction to a specific threat. It was a personality. It was a method of operation. Here's what makes this even more interesting from a psychological standpoint. Swan aggression isn't random. It's proportional and targeted. Researchers studying whooper swans in Iceland found that territorial males distinguished between different classes of intruder and calibrated their response accordingly. A small duck wandering into feeding territory got a low-intensity threat display, neck extended, wings partially raised, a slow aggressive glide in that direction. A juvenile swan from a neighboring pair got an escalated response, full wing beats, the iconic busked posture where the wings arch up like a medieval knight raising a shield. An adult male from a competing pair got the full treatment, physical contact, extended chase, sometimes pursuit lasting over 20 minutes. The gradation isn't random. It's a proportionate use of force applied to the specific level of threat. If you translated that into human terms, it would look like a highly experienced bouncer who never overreacts but never backs down either. And now let's talk about the females, because this is where the narrative that swans are graceful passive creatures completely falls apart. Pen swans, the females, are active co-strategists in territorial defense. They don't just sit on the nest while the male does the work. Research published in the journal Animal Behavior showed that female mute swans initiate a significant percentage of territorial confrontations, particularly against other females. The logic makes sense when you think about it. The greatest threat to a female swan's reproductive success isn't a male intruder. It's another female who might compete for the same nesting resources. So while the male is focused on driving off rival males, the female is running her own parallel operation against competing females. They're dividing the threat landscape between them. The lake isn't defended by one bird. It's defended by a coordinated pair with complementary threat response systems. That's a partnership structure that many species never evolve. Swans figured it out millions of years ago. Let me give you a number that will reframe everything you've heard so far. A mute swan pair's established territory on an English river or lake averages between 2 and 10 hectares of water surface. 10 hectares is roughly 14 football fields of water. And they are the sole authority on that entire area for the duration of the breeding season, which runs from March through August, sometimes longer if the pair is particularly dominant. Every other waterbird on that lake is, functionally, operating under the swan family's terms. They get the space that the swans don't want. They feed during the windows that the swans allow. If that sounds familiar, it's because it's the exact structure of how protection economies work in human urban settings. The swans aren't doing it consciously in the way humans do. But the functional outcome is identical. One dominant actor controls a geographic zone and extracts priority resource access from it, while all other actors self-regulate to avoid conflict. Now, you might be wondering, is this always the mute swan? What about other species? Great question, and the answer reveals something even more nuanced. Trumpeter swans in North America, which are actually larger than mute swans, show similar territorial behavior but with one critical difference. Their vocalizations play a much bigger role in boundary enforcement. Trumpeter pairs will call back and forth across a lake at dawn and dusk in a pattern that researchers believe functions as an acoustic perimeter, a way of saying, audibly, here is where our territory begins and ends. The neighboring pairs respond with their own calls. It's a daily renegotiation of territorial boundaries conducted through sound. The lake has a politics. It has a diplomatic channel. And every morning at dawn, when you hear those calls echoing across the water, you are hearing the equivalent of a morning council session where the local powers check in on the current arrangement. But here's the piece that most nature documentaries leave out entirely, and it's the piece that connects all of this to something genuinely profound. Swan pairs that maintain long-term stable territories show significantly higher reproductive success than pairs that are displaced or forced to move. That's not surprising. What is surprising is the mechanism. Long-term territory holders don't just have more resources, they have more knowledge. They know which predators patrol which section of the bank. They know which sections of the lake freeze first in early winter and which remain open. They know the timing of food source peaks. That accumulated knowledge is a form of capital. It's being passed, in limited ways, to cygnets during the months they spend with their parents before dispersal. The young swans who grow up on a well-defended, stable territory start their independent lives with an informational advantage over swans raised in chaos or displacement. The territorial aggression isn't just protecting food. It's protecting the conditions under which real learning can happen. The Swans criminal syndicate, if we want to keep using that frame, isn't just about short-term resource extraction. It's about generational stability. It's about making sure the next generation starts with every advantage possible. Which brings us to the most important reframe of all. When we look at a pair of swans controlling a lake, driving off competitors, calibrating threat responses, coordinating between male and female roles, and maintaining multi-generational territorial intelligence, we are not looking at aggression for its own sake. We are looking at a highly optimized system for turning environmental control into reproductive success. Every behavior that looks violent or territorial or antisocial from the outside is, from the swan's perspective, an investment in a future that its offspring will inherit. The lake isn't just a home. It's an enterprise. And the swans running it have been refining the business model for over 10 million years. The next time you're sitting by a lake and a swan glides toward you with that unmistakable combination of beauty and menace, don't just admire the feathers. Watch the eyes. Watch the posture. Watch the angle of the neck. You're looking at one of the most successful territorial strategists in the history of vertebrate life on Earth. It just happens to be wearing white.